Now streaming on Hulu, a wicked true crime.
It was a kidnapping, torture case.
A crime of greed and cruelty.
The men tortured the victim by beating, tasing, and burning him.
But it didn't end there.
And this is where it gets really horrible. The guy was cutting off my roommate's penis. It was like a bad dream.
This crime was horrific.
He's a psychopath.
Wicked Game, Devil in the Desert.
This was a story about greed, sadism, evil.
Now streaming only on Hulu.
Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man with a reminder that tomorrow is just an excuse away. Here is the captain.
It's good to be seen and good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
Today, we are still enjoying some delicious Silver Shoes Stout from Muncie Brewing Company. This is a smooth coffee flavor that is sweet from the brown sugar. A lot of stouts like to sweeten the ride, black sunshine, but this one has a smoky and a touch of earthiness to it, maybe like you would find in a hearty red wine. Garage grade 4 out of 5 bottle caps. And let's give some thanks and praise to our good friends, our good garage friends, for helping us out with this week's shows.
First up, a big We Like Your Jib to Eric in Kansas City from Joel in Tampa. And a very special We Like Your Jib goes out to Connor in Oakford, Illinois. Cheers, mate.
Shout out to all the Chiefs fans out there. Next up, we have a long distance cheers to Percy Jansen, listening from the city of Curitiba in Parana, Brazil. Percy, I hope I got that right. If not, I blame it on the Silver Shoe Stout. And last but certainly not least, we have Sarah in Lockyer Valley, Australia. Another long distance cheers. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the beer fund. We are forever grateful.
Yeah, BWERUN, Beer Run. If you're not subscribed to us on YouTube, what are you doing with your life? Get it together, okay? Get it together. Stop messing around. Go to YouTube's and subscribe to True Crime Garage TV. And thank me later. And that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody, gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime.
Such a case. 4 people found dead in a home, and today we learned this was not a murder-suicide.
Investigators say the victims didn't have time to fight back against the person who killed them. 7 News reporter Tony Cedrone talked with relatives tonight.
I keep feeling like I should be waking up from a dream right now, and it's just not happening. So yeah, it's like a movie or something. It's not supposed to be real life.
Monday afternoon, 4 adults were found dead inside a home in Pendleton. Anderson County Coroner Greg Shore is calling it a quadruple homicide.
Well, it's just tragic and something that we don't see here in Anderson County very often. The last time we had 4 people killed involving homicide was in 2007, 2008.
The 4 victims were Mike Scott, his wife Kathy Scott, and their mothers Barbara Scott and Violet Taylor. Amy Vilardi says her mother Kathy usually walks her dog in the morning, and when she didn't see her outside Monday morning, she called her house and nobody answered.
I went to knock on the door and I walked in. It was dark. I heard TVs on, and I flipped the light on, and that's about as far as I can go on that one.
Vilardi says her family has been kept out of the loop during the investigation, while investigators do everything they can to solve the crime.
And I understand, there again, they've got a job to do, but Sometimes as family members, we want answers, and we just want to know what's going on.
And now that evidence has been collected from the scene, all Vilardi and her family can do is wait.
If you were talking directly to the person, do you want to look in the camera and just say exactly what you would say to that person?
I can't say that on TV. I'm just going to be honest, I can't say that on TV.
In Pendleton, Tony Cedrone, 7 News.
In observance of the first anniversary of the quadruple homicide, the Independent Mail sat down with the 2 detectives leading the homicide investigation. This is Gene Culbertson and Tracy Call. Quote, "There hasn't been a day we haven't worked on it," Call said. They reviewed the evidence over and over. They said they remained optimistic that the case would be solved. And they said that there is literally nothing we won't investigate. It's an active investigation. We want nothing more than to give justice to these people. They deserve it. Their family and their grandchildren deserve answers, the detective said. But Call and Culbertson would not share what they were working on, or at least their working theory regarding the case. They just simply said that evidence was still being processed by SLED, and it had been submitted in October. It wasn't known what the evidence was that was submitted. And they said that they were waiting on receiving the answers and information back regarding those tests. But what we end up having here, Captain, to kind of make this case even more complex, is a civil suit. So, and actually this was the sheriff's office that was battling a lawsuit. So in May of 2016, Amy and Ross Vilardi filed a civil suit against the Anderson County Sheriff's Office to compel them to return all of the items that the sheriff's office had impounded as potential evidence. These were items taken from both homes, the murder house and the house where the Vilardis lived in the back of the lot, pursuant to multiple search warrants executed by the sheriff's office. So the list of items that we're talking about is the Vilardis wanted back were guns, electronics, a 2010 Toyota Tundra, and a 2005 Toyota Corolla. They also said that they wanted $87,000 in cash. Now, it's important to note here that this $87,000 in cash was found in the Vilardi's trailer, not the trailer where the murders occurred. So some of these items were taken from the trailer, and some of them were taken from where the Vilardis lived. The complaint stated that the sheriff's office had completed numerous tests and analysis on the currency, specifically stating that they had found no DNA or other evidence linking the plaintiffs who are requesting these items back to any wrongdoing.
Mm-hmm.
Stated that the sheriff's office had wrongfully and willfully retained possessions of the property despite the property lacking any evidentiary value. In other words, you found no trace evidence on this stuff and you haven't pressed charges against us, so give us back our property.
But one of the problems is when law enforcement was talking to Amy, again, this is one of the victim's daughters, lives on the property. So, of course, they're going to ask her what's going on. Of course, she's going to be somebody of interest that they want to talk to. And she also states, well, you know, my stepfather, he was known because he would have these, what do you want to call it, antiques or whatever he was buying.
Yeah, collectibles, valuables that he was buying and selling and helping others to sell as well.
Yeah, and so she said, yeah, he was known to have a lot of cash on hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think of a lot of cash on hand, I'm thinking like, I don't know, a couple $1,000 is a lot of cash on hand. But she was saying like this could be like 60,000 or more.
Yeah.
So then when they don't find that in the victim's house and they find that in your house, well, that's pretty suspicious, don't you think? Especially when you have a small business, that there's no evidence that you're doing well enough to have that kind of cash on hand.
Yes. And so that's what I wanted to get into here, because the first thing that jumped into my mind, look, life can get pretty tough. There's no need to make it tougher on people, especially people that had suffered such a great loss like this. So my first thought was, well, okay, well, maybe this money that they found at the Vilardi's house, they needed it back because they people need money to pay bills and whatnot. And so perhaps Ross and Amy really needed their money back. But then here's what we get into. It's presumably not to pay any kind of mortgage or rent. They're still living on the Scott property. And here's a bizarre twist, in my opinion, and this is fact. Soon after the murders, they moved in with the kids. They took the kids and they moved into the main house on the property, the one where the shootings had gone down, where the murders took place. Listen to this. This is by November 12th. They had moved into the trailer and they started ripping out the carpet and even replaced the furniture. Now, look, everybody's different. I certainly have my fair share of weird. Okay. I got a big batch of weird in me, but let me toss out a hypothetical to you here, Captain. You are considered one of the great minds of our time. So I want to get your opinion.
Yeah. Underrated, some people would say.
Let's say you and your family, and let's say you're living with your family and you got a couple kids and you live on this property. It's fairly large, but one of your relatives, a couple of your relatives and some other people were murdered in another house on that property. Yeah. And they've not found the person that did it. Would you for a second consider moving your children into that home? Like, wouldn't you think like there's a chance this guy or these guys could come back and they're not going to find an empty house this time. They're going to find 4 more potential victims.
Yeah, I believe it was like the day of the funeral, the husband of Amy was moving furniture out of the main house to sell it or something strange. And then Amy herself wears a weird outfit to the funerals, like bright red dress with a big Kentucky Derby style hat. I mean, just some strange things. Again, I don't have a problem if you want to question law enforcement. Don't question them because they're questioning you. I hate when people go, stop looking at us and go find the killers. Okay, there's a process. And so I think they're started to have a bunch of red flags. But when you're law enforcement and you show up to a property, there's not a clear motive. And then you find this stack of cash. The investigation or the evidence is pointing you into a direction. And then you go, well, what would the motivation be? The motivation would be money. And then what does that person that you now start going, okay, is it possible that Amy and her husband are responsible for these murders? And we know that they had a feud, a family feud. But on top of that, we have this cash, and then they try to sue the police department. To me, that's more evidence that the motivation was not just hatred, it was hatred and money.
Well, word. And in their defense, if a sheriff's office had confiscated $80,000 from my home, I would be livid. I would want my money back. Like at some point, like I get it. You have an investigation to do, but I have mouths to feed. I have a situation where I got a family of 4. Now let's go back to the situation of family of 4, because there's no way in hell I'm moving my children into a murder home where the murder is still unsolved, especially when it's family members that could have been targeted. If it's just me, no problems, man. I'll sit on the front porch every night with a shotgun on my lap and a handgun strapped in my belt and drinking Bud Heavies, waiting for the killer to come back so I can get some street justice. No problems there. But We're talking about moving children into. In fact, I wouldn't be able to stay on that property with kids. Now, this lawsuit here is interesting because what it does is it opens up some doors that were previously closed, because what happens now, this lawsuit, other family members come forward keep in mind, there's two people here that Amy's not related to by blood. And so there's other family members of these victims that come forward and they're saying, wait a second, you can sue the sheriff's office over these property items if you want, and you're the plaintiff. We get that. However, we're other family members and we're here to say that maybe you're not entitled to those. You can't just assume that all those items were going to go to you.
Right.
And so we end up getting into this squabble over what belonged to who, what personal property belonged to who. And other families get into this lawsuit and they're actually on the opposition. They're on the sheriff's department side. They're saying, look, not all of these items belong to Amy and Ross. And this lawsuit ends up dragging on for about 5 years' time, and it got really ugly. So they bring in this forensic accountant, had to be employed to make heads or tails of who actually owned the money in all of the bank accounts, not just what was, on the properties, but also who would legally inherit any of this stuff.
Well, and let me put out a scenario for you. It is also in the realm of possibility that this family is murdered. The daughter that has a feud with her mother and her stepfather goes in the house, sees this violent carnage, and decides, well, I'm just going to take this money before anybody shows up.
Oh yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, she's the one that found them dead. You could have let's say the money they found in her trailer did belong to her mother and stepdad, or even two of her grandmother and the other grandmother. But there would be an opportunity where that she could have found them dead and not been responsible for the murders, but still
took the money,
saw an opportunity, right? To put it kind of blunt and disgusting. But so now let's go to January 2017, because here's another shift in the investigation. This is when a new sheriff came into play. And this is Sheriff Chad McBride was elected. He took office and took up the investigation. And there was he started making a conference. This is a press conference, made comments at this press conference on the second anniversary of the murders in November of 2017. And he said something that had never been said before to the media. He said his investigators had identified who we believe are the suspects. Now, they weren't ready to make any arrests, is what he said. And he also said, we will not be announcing or saying the names of the suspects. But keep in mind, we're getting some clues here, right? Suspects were plural. So that tells us the sheriff's office believed that at least two people are responsible for these murders. He also said that they are submitting new evidence, additional evidence to labs for testing. And we're still waiting for answers on that analysis to come back. When it does, we will hopefully be able to move forward with this case. At that same press conference, we have Pam. Remember Pam? This is Mike's sister. Her mother was also killed in that trailer. She has some statements for the media. And this was her statement, quote, "This was not a random act of violence. We believe our family members were targeted and murdered out of hatred and greed. God has given us the last 2 years to grieve and to heal, but we still need closure." End of quote. And then she seemed to be speaking directly to the killers. And this is strange, but intriguing. She says, quote, "We love you and we forgive you."
Sounds like she's talking directly to somebody.
Yes. Yes. And it almost sounds like we don't know what conversations were had between the sheriff's office and some of this extended family, or what information was passed on from the new sheriff to Amy and Ross. But it sounds like maybe even independently of one another, Pam, the relative, and the sheriff's office have arrived at their own idea or theory of who the suspects should be, whether it's a shared opinion or not.
Well, let's just back up a second. We have to remember that Amy was basically saying law enforcement owes it to us to inform us on every movement they're making. And so when they weren't giving her all this information, she was pissed off and run into the media about it. And then when you're not going to give me back my stuff that you took, we're going to sue you. Again, this is just not looking good.
I don't want to get into the minutia of a lot of this lawsuit because it's rather complicated. What we're talking about here, the short of it, Captain, would be that not just the money and the property items that were confiscated from the Scott property shortly after the murders pursuant to those search warrants, but there were also parts of this lawsuit that they were trying to sort through with bank accounts. Okay. There were large sums of money in bank accounts, and some of it had been given to the Scotts while they were still alive. Like, hey, Grandma A and Grandma B have a good amount of money in their bank accounts. Let's give this over to a joint account so it can be used to take care of me. Especially, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you got a bunch of money in the bank and you get too old to take care of yourself, and your loved one who's trying to take care of you can't get to your money that is needed for your health care, for your well-being, for room and board, all kinds of things, right? They have to jump through hoops sometimes to get to that money. If you get to a situation where you can't take care of yourself or make withdrawals or write checks for yourself. So at some point, the grandmothers decide that we're going to make these bank accounts either joint bank accounts or just straight up give some of the money to Michael and Kathy so they can take care of us. So they had to sort through all of that. Now, what ends up happening is we don't get to sort through a lot of that. It doesn't sound like there was a great determination on who gets what before this happens. We end up getting some arrests in the case. So police worked this case for 8 years, doggedly amassing evidence and building their case. By 2023, Anderson County Sheriff's Detective Scott Hill was in charge of the investigation. Now, this was reported on Inside Edition. Hill spoke at length on the Unsolved Mysteries podcast in March of 2023. Now, on that podcast, quote, Hill said that detectives found no signs of any robbery at the scene, but grew suspicious when they learned that Mike often had large sums of cash on hand thanks to a side business where he would pay cash for gold. Detectives also learned that no one other than family members knew about Mike having these large sums of cash, said Hill. Then, when detectives obtained a search warrant for Amy and Ross's trailer, they made a surprising discovery. According to Hill, we found a little over $65,000, almost $68,000 in a safe in the master bedroom of the single wide, said Hill. That cash immediately raised questions for Hill and the other detectives. We were told by various family members and confirmed through interviews that Amy and Ross were in financial trouble. Their cars were about to be repossessed. They were about to be kicked out of the building they rented for their business. So it was pretty surprising to find that amount of money when they were having financial issues. The family had to have known their killers because nobody put up a fight until after the attack started. 1 week later, after all of this, the Anderson County Sheriff's Office announced that Amy and her husband were persons of interest in the quadruple homicide case, and this would later lead to their arrest.
All right, we are back. Talk cans in the air.
Raise them high. Raise them high.
Yeah, I just, there was always something when you go back and you watch these interviews with Amy, there's just something that seems off.
I hate to do this. I hate to be the judge a book by its cover kind of guy, but she's one of those people that as soon as I saw her and watched her talk about the case, she gave me a bad, uneasy feeling.
Yeah.
There just was something off about, I don't know. It was partly her demeanor, partly her words. I don't know. There was just something that was off. And I think I think there's other people out there, garage friends, that would agree with some of those statements. Now, very early on in the case, you had asked about search warrants on the first episode, and they executed, the sheriff's office executed numerous search warrants at the Vilardi's home. This was on November 2nd, so the day that the bodies were discovered, and then again on the 4th, and then again on the 11th of November, they searched a storage unit owned or rented by Ross in Anderson County. Search warrants state the male victim, Mike, in the residence is known to deal in gold jewelry and usually has large sums of cash, according to neighbors. They believe that a search warrant of the Vilardi's residence will yield evidence pertinent to this investigation. Okay, Captain, the seized items include, we later find out what the seized items were, 24 firearms and ammunition, knives, a camera from the front porch, 4 shotgun residue kits, a wallet containing ID belonging to someone named James Harris. We don't know who this person is. Cash, 2 gold testing kits, a laptop, 20 plus phones, and a video game console or video game consoles, 2 vehicles, a bag of yellow metal jewelry, and a bag of yellow metal watches. Now, none of the guns that were collected by the sheriff's office matched the ballistics of the gun used to shoot the 4 victims.
Well, no, because that'd be too easy.
Yes. The arrest warrants for Amy and Ross specify that the murders took place on or about Halloween, October 31st, 2015. That would be that Saturday. The state's theory of the case is as follows. Amy and her mother did not get along. The schism in the family, which finally boiled over on the 4th of July, had been brewing long before. Amy posted nasty things about her mother and Mike, her stepfather, online and refused to let them and the grandmothers see the kids. But then right before the murders, Amy seemed to have a sudden change of heart. Amy told investigators that she and her mother had made up, saying that she contacted her mom and said she would bring the kids over to celebrate Halloween. A day before the murders, Kathy, her mother, posted on Facebook a message saying, "Everything looking better. Prayers answered." The state's theory of the case was that this was designed to ensure that all 4 victims, Mike, Kathy, Violet, and Barbara, would be home that evening.
Well, because if you just get rid of your mother and you get rid of your stepfather, you still have the grandparents or the grandmothers that need a place to live. So you're not going to be able to steal the cash because they'll know about the cash. You're not going to get whatever items in the double wide that you can sell. You're not going to probably get the double wide, so everybody has to go.
Well, and go back to our timeline that we discussed in part 1. The kids were not actually around at all. Amy's kids had been placed with Ross's parents for the previous week so the couple could enjoy their newlywed week. They didn't pick up the kids until Sunday. The family of 4 is murdered on Saturday. Amy's mom is posting on Facebook, "Everything looking better, prayers answered." The prayers that she was praying was that she could see her grandkids.
Yeah.
Amy was going to bring them over on Saturday night. She couldn't bring them over Saturday night. They were an hour and a half away at Ross's parents' home. So
it doesn't line up. Yeah.
Her promise to her mother that they could see the kids on Halloween was a lie, a ruse to get access to the house and all of the necessary victims. Now, Amy originally told investigators that she last saw the victims on Halloween night around 8 p.m. Ross told the police that he had gone to bed at 9 p.m. that Saturday night. But police found surveillance footage of Ross buying beer at a gas station around 9:30 p.m. Saturday night. Okay, well, maybe he got his time wrong, but still, you're being asked this 2 days later. You think that you would remember going to the gas station and buying beer at 9:30 on that Saturday. Amy originally told investigators that on that Sunday morning, she and Ross left at 5 a.m. to drive to Blythewood to get the kids. What police learned, what the sheriff's office learns, is that while on that trip, the Vilardis decided to get rid of their cell phones and get new ones. Also, Amy said that she had left a message on her mom's home answering machine when she called that Monday to check on them. No such message was ever found. And then remember the shoes? We talked about the distinct Asics Gel Speedstar running shoe prints left at the crime scene in blood with blood drips on top of them. Ross Vilardi admitted that he owned that type of sneakers, but couldn't produce them. Nobody could find these shoes. And then, of course, there's that large sum of money from the Vilardi's trailer. And you know what's interesting too here, Captain, is we criticize these security cameras an awful lot. On this camera at the gas station where Ross went to go pick up the beer, he's wearing those ASIC Gel Speedstar running shoes. So he had those on that night, the night that the prints were left at the murder scene. He's wearing them buying beer, and then 2 days later, 3 days later, when they're talking to him about these shoes, they've magically disappeared. This is some damning shit right here. One of the most notable aspects of the recovered cash, okay, this is the cash that they took out of Amy Vilardi's trailer, was the manner in which the money was organized. Miss Vilardi claimed that she had been saving this money for years, right? She claimed that her and Ross had been saving up this money, right, and it was their life savings. However, officers were able to match the manner in which the money was organized to that of one of the victims. Mike Scott was apparently known to maintain his cash grouped and wrapped by denomination and issue date, right? You know, there's a date when the money was printed. He's stacking it 5s, 10s. This stack is all 20s. This stack is all 50s. This stack is all 100s. And but he stacks them in order of the issue date as well. This is an incredibly unusual habit. And I think it's probably safe to say that 95, 97, maybe 99% of the people walking the planet do not store their cash in this manner. That's the exact same way that they found the bundles of bills in Amy Vilardi's home safe. That's how they were grouped together.
Yeah, that's a big red flag. And so much of this case doesn't make any sense. Again, going after law enforcement to give us information. Well, it makes sense if you're the one that committed the crime. You want to know what law enforcement knows. Are they on to you or are they not on to you? But also, like when they ask her, well, did your stepfather have any cash on him? Why didn't she just lie? Because she could have said, nah, he never really had cash on him. Even if other family members came forward and said, no, he had cash on him because he would buy, sell, and trade, and he'd also collect gold and turn it into, have it melted down, turn it into money. But you could then just go, well, that's hearsay. That's what they think. But I was closer to my parents. I would know this. And also, you're the one that finds the bodies. You would think that you would have seen these shoe prints and then told your husband, hey, you might want to get rid of these shoes because those are a unique shoe.
This is crazy. So just 2 days before Mike was murdered in his home, so he must have sold something for a friend, a coworker, because this is October 29th. Remember, now we're learning that everybody believes the murders took place October 31st. On the 29th, Mike sent a message to a coworker. The message contained a photo of $100 bills saying, quote, "You're in the money." So this must mean like, hey, I sold your item or items for you. Here's your cash. It was from this photo. In the photo, police could see the serial numbers on the bills. That money with the same exact serial numbers turned up in the Vilardi's home on the day after the bodies were found.
Oh, God. That's the definition of caught red-handed, right? Again, though, but if you're law enforcement, you have to go, Is it possible that they found the family and then they took the money? But I guarantee you, law enforcement was smart enough to say, so you found the body. Did anybody else go in the house with you? Because if the answer is no, I'm the only one that went into the house, then why are your husband's footprints, bloody footprints, found in the
shoe
house?
prints and shoe prints with blood drops on top of them? So
Right.
why I keep pointing that out is that is evidence that those shoe prints were made during the commission of the murders. Meaning, here's what happened. All right. He's already stabbed some people. There's blood already on the floors of that home. He's racing through the home, either A, to get to the other victim that was found in the bedroom, and or to flee the home after everybody's dead. The reason why you see blood droplets on top of his bloody shoe prints is that the knife that was used, the hunting or military style knife that was used to murder these people, was still dripping blood on top of those shoe prints. So I get it. There's a lot of ways that you could leave the door open that they didn't commit the murders, but it's when you take this piece of evidence and then you add that piece of evidence, and then you add this piece of evidence, and then you add another piece of evidence. When you start adding that all up, it builds a mountain of evidence that all points to two people. It's conceivable that they didn't murder them. It's conceivable that they even took the cash and the safe from the home and didn't murder these people. Now, let me ask you, what do you think the probability is that the murderer was wearing the same shoes as the husband where we found the money in their house, and we can prove that those shoes were present at the time of the murder? It starts to get very slim, the chances of them not being the ones that committed it.
Well, and also their alibi doesn't check out. Their whereabouts don't check out.
The kids weren't where they said they would be. They ditched their cell phones.
Right. Doesn't her husband also have a military background?
You nailed it, my friend. So look, this whole thing was planned, not just planned. It was planned down to the date and time. Now, how did they carry it out? Well, the investigators from the hit Oxygen TV show, the true crime show, they were invited to consult with investigators from the sheriff's office. On these two episodes, here's one thing that we learned. The Sheriff McBride and one of the detectives, they were all considering this. They felt that whoever carried this out likely had to have some kind of training. Okay. And here's what they're saying. The captain, Wayne Mills, from the sheriff's office, he's a former Marine. He felt that the victim's throats being cut very lethally and efficiently was perhaps the mark of a military suspect. Quote, I believe with the expertise that took place, I believe it was someone very comfortable with an edged weapon, Mills told Cold Justice. He goes on to say a Marine fits that category. This was someone who took some training and had some background in this type of situation and obviously was very personally related to the victims, end quote. Mills pointed out that Marines were trained to deal with more than one subject at a time as well. Ross Vilardi was a decorated U.S. Marine with specialized training in combat needed to guard embassies around the world. So, to expand on this theory a bit, it's likely that Amy used her powers of persuasion, the kids, to gather all the victims together in the same house at the same time. Now she's in there in the living room with the four victims. Ross is sitting on the couch, presumably next to Mike. And out of nowhere, Ross initiated the attack before any of the victims knew what the hell was going on. And he very quickly carried out these murders.
And for what?
Greed, my friend.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Hey, let's kill them. We'd get the money. Plus, we don't get along with them anyways. Or is it, well, they're not in our lives. We don't get along with them anyways. Let's get rid of them. And then at least we get something out of it.
Well, and one thing that I heard someone say years ago, and it's always stuck with me, and I think it plays a factor here in this case. Both parts of this statement. You know, you often hear people say money is the root of all evil. And I've heard at least one person correct the room and say, no, the root of all evil is no money, having no money.
Right.
And so you have these two broke individuals where their lives are falling apart and they have this nest egg that's sitting right in their front yard. The only thing you have to do is be willing to kill 4 people for it.
Yeah, and we don't know what his background, if he was in a situation when he was in the service, was he in situations where he had to take somebody else's life and he just thought, well, done it before, just for different reasons.
So after they were indicted by the grand jury, after all this evidence was presented and they find probable cause to make the arrest, we end up having this bond hearing where both of them move to be released on bond, right? Pending their trial. So they would be sent home and await trial, and then they would go to trial. Well, February of last year in 2024 was the bond hearing. And Amy and Ross were each there wearing jail jumpsuits and shackles as they faced Judge Heath Taylor. Senior Deputy Assistant DA Heather Weiss argued on behalf of the state that Amy and Ross should not be, right? We should deny bond. So first she goes into this and reviews the evidence for the judge and then the reasons that bond should be denied. Her presentation and argument included in part the following. She says, Amy is aware she is facing these charges. We believe if she was ever going to run, it would be now. We don't know where any of the money is. She's saying there's still money out there that we can't account for. It could be in cash. Right. She could use this to flee. So the prosecution basically felt strongly that the couple posed a substantial flight risk and that they had the means to abscond to another country even, using assets they drained from the murder victim's estate. Plus, several surviving family members of the Scotts and Violet Taylor professed in court their fear if Amy and Ross were to be let out and await trial. Remember, Ross Vilardi was trained in significant hand-to-hand combat in the Marines, and Amy's family was murdered in an intimate fashion. Could the family suffer violent repercussions because of the arrest should this couple be released on bond? And then the assistant DA dropped this bomb at the bond hearing. Quote, when I got here today, I found a report from the sheriff's office. It stated that last night the guard at the jail learned from another inmate that Amy Vilardi had a shank, a piece of a metal bed. The cell was tossed and they found 2 shanks in her room. A witness said Amy made a comment that she was going to get out of jail one way or another. So the state has significant concerns about danger to the community and flight risk posed by the Vilardis. I guess the argument for allowing bond for the Vilardis was that the defense did not agree with the state's evidence. Obviously, they never do. They did point out a few interesting angles to it. One being that there didn't seem to be a whole lot of this case drug on for 8 years before an arrest was made. They didn't seem to have a whole lot of new evidence, right? They had evidence that had been collected early in the investigation. So they're questioning if there was enough evidence for the arrest in the first place, but then also stating this case drug on for 8 years and these 2 never took off prior. And you're spot on here, Captain. The Judge Taylor agreed and denied the bond. And simply put it, it's because of the heinous nature of the offenses charged in this case. Right? Like if there's enough evidence to arrest these 2 on this kind of case, this kind of violent, horrific, heinous case, then these 2 are not going to be allowed to just run around and roam freely while they await their trial, which necessarily isn't going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. We've seen plenty of times where it takes a year, 2 years, 5 years to get to a trial of this magnitude.
With the amount of episodes we've done, it seems like nothing should shock us or nothing should surprise us anymore. But these vicious murders, shocking. But what's also shocking, and I guess I'll never be able to wrap my head around, is you go, for what? You killed these innocent people for what? Because you had a feud with them? Is that the reason, or was money the reason? And you go, okay, $60,000 to $80,000. Was that really going to change anything? It might change your life, get you out of some hole you got yourself into, but chances are you're just going to get back into that same hole, and you can never undo what you did. And I bet there's no communication of this. There's no evidence of this, but it's very possible that they at some point ask for some monetary help. But she didn't seem to be that appreciative of what her mother was doing for her, what her mother was doing for her kids, and what the stepdad was doing for her and what the stepdad was doing for her kids. It's crazy. And I thought too, once they made an arrest, that one of the two, whether it's Amy or her husband, would kind of go, well, actually, I didn't want to do this. They put me up to it. But it's just, none of this makes sense.
Well, and one thing that I often have to remind myself of when reviewing these cases, doing the research, putting it together, the stories, it's called Psycho for a reason.
Yeah.
We're not going to understand some of this. We're not capable of understanding some of this. And that's what separates us from them. So after 8 years, Kathy, Mike, and Barbara Scott and Violet Taylor are finally seeing some justice for what has to be one of the more vicious and brutal crimes we have covered. Assuming all of the evidence we have reviewed against Amy and Ross Vilardi is true, well, then the two planned the execution of these 4 people, some of whom were flesh and blood of Amy's, people who were her children's grandparents and great-grandparents. The whole point of the taking of 4 innocent people's lives was to at once enrich themselves and rid themselves of the obstacles to their happiness, Amy's family, the people who allowed her to live on their land and took care of her children. As the prosecutor said, Amy seemed to be the driving force behind the evil plot. Although she was constantly accusing her mother of being a narcissist, Amy is the one who believes that the world owes her something, that she is entitled to what belongs to others. She may have gotten away with it for 8 years, but she's finally got what was coming to her. South Carolina recently resumed executions under its capital punishment law, and the Supreme Court there recently ruled that executions by firing squad and an electric chair are on the table. So good luck, Amy.
I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the garage each and every week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks for telling your mother. Thanks for telling your brother. Colonel, do we have any recommended reading for this week?
This might start off sounding a little strange, but bear with us here, right?
You're
Garage
always
friends,
strange.
bear with us. So this week, our recommendation is to visit our webpage and consider making a donation, small or whatever, in any way that you can help, to the beer fund. And here's what we'd like to do. All money raised by the beer fund for the month of February, the garage is going to donate to Keeping Our Girls Safe organization. We've talked about them before. It's a organization that advocates for, educates, equips, and empowers young women so that they are not victims of violent crime. We've talked about the website in the past. It's KOGsafe.com, keepourgirlssafe.com. And this month we will be donating all of the beer fund money to KOGsafe.com. This organization was, unfortunately, should never have been, right? It should never have happened. But because of the taking of a young woman's life, this was Sierra Jogan. She went for a bicycle ride in Northwest Ohio. She was kidnapped less than 500 feet from her home, and it was later learned that she had been murdered by a previously convicted violent offender, a man that should have never been out on the streets to begin with. And think about that, how close she was to her home. She was just out riding her bicycle when this man took her. Keep Our Girls Safe has come up with some great ways to keep young women safe. They even provide self-defense classes at no cost to young women. They also designed a Angel in Disguise self-defense keychain. And what we're going to do here is 3 persons that donate to the beer fund this month at random. We'll pick 3 people at random, and we're going to send out a Keep Our Girls Safe safety packet to each of these 3, which includes a door alarm and window alarm, a seatbelt cutter and window breaker for your car, and a self-defense keychain, amongst some other items. And you know what? We'll include a signed copy of the Delphi Murders book as well to go along with that. So help us, help out the garage. We want to help out these good people who have suffered and put together this fantastic organization that is trying to empower young women and women of all ages to be able to defend themselves and get away from these perpetrators that unfortunately do exist. So to make a donation to the beer fund, you just go to truecrimegarage.com and click on the pint glass. And we want to thank you in advance for all of your help. And a big thank you to anybody that has contributed to the beer fund in the past. God bless.
And for everything true crime, check out truecrimegarage.com. And until next week, be good, be kind, and don't